This week I got to talk with Liann Zhang about her new influencer thriller, Julie Chan is Dead. It is so fun. The book reads like you're reading a novel that takes place in internet. So if you are as chronically online as Liann and I are, you're going to love the tone and aesthetic of this book. But here is the synopsis. Julie Chan has nothing. Her twin sister has everything, except a pulse. Julie Chan, a supermarket cashier with nothing to lose, finds herself thrust into the glamorous yet perilous world of her late twin sister, Chloe VanHuusen, a popular influencer. Separated at a young age, the identical twins were polar opposites and rarely spoke, except for one viral video that Chloe initiated, finding my long-lost twin and buying her a house, #emotional. When Julie discovers Chloe's lifeless body under mysterious circumstances, she seizes the chance to live the life she's always envied. Transforming into Chloe is easier than expected. Julie effortlessly adapts Chloe's luxurious influencer lifestyle, complete with designer clothes, a meticulous skincare routine, and millions of adoring followers. However, Julie soon realizes that Chloe's seemingly picture-perfect life was anything but. Haunted by Chloe's untimely death and struggling to fit into the privileged influencer circle, Julie faces mounting challenges during a week-long island retreat with Chloe's exclusive group of influencer friends. As events spiral out of control, Julie uncovers the sinister forces that may have led to her sister's demise and realizes she might be the next target. I devoured this book. It will be one of my favorites of 2025. It is so fun. It is so satirical. It gets absolutely bonkers at the end in some of my favorite ways. And I just will not forget about this book anytime soon. So that being said, let's hear from Liann. I am so excited to talk about Julie Chan is Dead, but I did want to get to know a little bit about you before we dive into the book. So did you have a moment when you were like, I want to write? Did you have a moment when you like had a book idea? What was that moment for you?
Funnily enough, my first actual ever written book, I co-wrote one in the fifth grade with one of my friends. It was also like a mystery horror novel that aged like really poorly. But I guess that was my first foray. Like, I guess it was always in me, but I didn't really realize that I wanted to do it until um, basically I kind of followed the timeline of a lot of people my age, I feel, where we read a lot when we were young. And then
Yeah.
slowly in high school, less because of screens. And then
Mm-hmm.
at the end of high school and beginning of university, I got really into it again. And then at COVID, like a lot of people, I just had a lot of time on my hands and I started writing one day. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, imagine if
Yeah.
I could do this like as a job. That would be
Right.
fantastic. And then kind of went from there. I just became like really committed to the idea and like very delusional about like this is what it is going to be for me. So yeah.
Yeah. It is cool. I've heard a few people, I feel like more this year, so that's probably like kind of the same timeline for them, but it is cool how, I mean, COVID was not cool. It's cool how like a lot of people did like tap into their
Hmm.
creativity more just because you were able to,
Hmm.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. What does your writing process look like, or what did it look like for this book?
Yeah. Sorry, you just mentioned your dog and my cat. I don't know if you just heard just like whining.
Oh, I didn't hear her, but that's okay.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, my process can vary very widely. Like, I do actively try to sit down at my desk like day to day and like crunch out
Yeah.
words. Um, but a lot of the times I hate to say it, it's like I end up procrastinating and then I do things that
Hmm.
are kind of related to writing but aren't actually
Mm-hmm.
writing. Like I'll like go back and edit another chapter and then not put any new words in. But for me it's very sporadic, unfortunately. Like like
Uh-huh.
sometimes I'll be really inspired in the morning and I'll like get a lot done. And then sometimes a whole
Hmm.
day drags and I write like 300 really bad words that I'm probably going to delete. And then suddenly at like 10 p.m., I'm like in bed and I'm like
Yeah.
hit with inspiration. And then I'm like writing until 3 a.m., you know? So
Wow. Yeah.
yeah, it's,
That's cool.
I, I have to follow the vibes in my heart, I feel like, with
Right?
that. Yeah.
You're like, my writing style is vibes. I like that.
Literally.
Do you do anything to get to know your characters, or do you kind of get to know them as you're writing them?
I get to know them as I'm writing them. I feel like that's something my writing group pointed out before, because a lot of the times in the beginning, main characters are usually a bit more nebulous, and then their identity forms as time goes on. And I like learn more about them as I write, and then I go back
Yeah.
and, revise the beginning. But although I would say Julie Chan's a bit of an exception where like her character was very obvious to me from the jump.
Mm.
Um, and I think it's because she does borrow a lot from like how I interact with the internet.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
she's a bit like a very much meaner version of me, but
Right.
I think in that
Maybe
way,
it's your inner thoughts.
yeah. I mean, I had to think the thoughts to write it down, but
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That was what I really loved about this book is I'm definitely chronically online, and like you had so many really cool internet references, and kind of what you were saying too. She's really snarky, like is a part of the character. There's also like satire to all of this as well about influencer and internet culture. But then like some of it also felt to me like I was like the tone even felt like I was online in some ways.
Mhm.
So how did you approach like creating that tone? Because I felt like the tone was so specific and I loved it.
Thank you. I feel like the tone, I'm just such a chronically online individual, unfortunately, that
Mhm.
I know the lingo. Like, I know how people talk online because I am one. And
Yes.
in that way, it does come out very naturally. And I also feel like part of it is the other characters in the book, like the Belladonnas who you
Mm.
meet, the other like influencer group. A lot of the ways that they spoke, almost like this echolalia between them. It was meant to
Yeah.
like mirror how you would feel when you like open up an Instagram comment section and everyone's just kind of echoing each other, and we're like, you know, in this space where everybody just is conforming to each other's thoughts. So I
Hmm.
think that also might, in a way, kind of demonstrate that vibe and that tone. Um,
Hmm.
but overall, I think it just came out very naturally because
Yeah.
Julie is an online citizen and she just talks and thinks like one. Yeah.
Yes, totally. Yeah. It's like my favorite. I love books with influencer culture in them. And then snarky and satire always work for me, so it was just like everything together. I did see that you were briefly a skincare influencer. So
Mhm.
what about your time doing that influenced your approach to this book?
Yeah, I think it definitely gave me a very unique perspective beyond like the everyday minutia of what it's like to like be behind the scenes, which did contribute to part of like the middle of the book when Julie's trying to be a regular
Mm,
influencer before things kind
yeah.
of go wild. Um, but I was able to borrow a lot from my own feelings. Obviously, I was never to the degree of success as the Belladonnas, where they're like millions and millions. I was very small. Um,
Hmm.
but I did get to see a lot of the behind the scenes, the dynamics between people and how they interact with each other. That played a lot into it, like the sense of like entitlement and privilege that exists,
Mm.
especially within communities like the beauty community, because to get started in those types of places, you kind of have to have things. Like you have to have privilege.
Hmm.
You can't just start a blog with like one face wash and like, one
Right.
blush, right? Like you need to own not necessarily an excess. Like I didn't own an excess when I started, but I owned like
Hmm.
a decent skincare regimen for me to
Hmm.
like post and to like review. And so with that comes a territory where a lot of the people who are able to succeed already have a lot because you need to
Mm.
start with a lot to get to that point. And once
Hmm.
I became part of those communities, it was interesting to see because for me, I was pretty young. I was a teenager, and most of them were like
Mm.
grown adult women. And seeing them
Right.
conduct themselves in a very like entitled, privileged way in comparison to
Hmm.
how they projected themselves on their feeds and their public facing persona was very
Yeah.
stark and very interesting to me, especially because it would
Hmm.
be like one click away. Like the feed is right there, they're perfect. And then I click onto the
Right.
DMs and I read through the group chats, and then I'm like, oh, that isn't you. Like that, it's
Yeah.
a separate entity. Um,
Hmm.
so in that way, that's kind of part of the inspiration there.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of that as much, how much you kind of have to like own, especially in beauty. Like there is so much you have to own to get
Mm-hmm.
started.
Yeah.
And then the people who are doing like different makeup looks every day, like I can't even imagine how much they have. I hadn't really thought of it that
Yeah.
way. The other thing that I loved was that when you introduced each new character, you also basically gave their follower counts across multiple platforms. Like this was like the important stuff to know about these
Mhm.
people. And I thought it was such a cool kind of like aesthetic touch to the story. Did you think of that early on, or how did you like come up with that?
Yeah, I knew I had to have that because it's kind of a thing that happens in these influencer communities where they judge your
Hmm.
value based on how much followers you have. So some people
Hmm.
are like, "Oh, you only have 100,000 followers. Like, why are you here?" Like, they feel
Yeah.
like there's a certain threshold to success and to like mingle with one another. Like, you know,
Hmm.
that is very important to that kind of community. So, yes.
Yes. Yeah, the other part kind of like in related or to the theme of the internet and the pros and cons of it. Um it's it was really funny. Like there's a line where she's like scrolling and just wanting to see something like funny, and basically like has a therapist pop into her feed and she's like, I'm not looking to heal my inner child right
Hmm.
now, like scroll. But I felt like that was such a cool, it was a cool detail because there are tons of benefits to being online. And then there are like other times where it's questionable if it's benefiting you or not. So, and then you do that at scale in a lot of different ways. But how did you approach that theme?
Yeah, in terms of that, I think it's very much a reflection of how I feel as an individual online. I do have a very much love-hate relationship with the internet. It's kind of like a toxic relationship. I can acknowledge that there's a lot of bad things going on, and it's probably impacting my mind in a negative way, my attention span, how I look and perceive others. Like I can acknowledge this and I know this is fact. And yet,
Hmm.
like, you cannot tear it away from me, right? Like I wrote a
I
whole book
know.
about it, about how it's
Yeah.
bad, and yet I'm gonna go like 10 minutes after this, look at my phone.
Yes.
Um, so I do kind of acknowledge that that's kind of the place Julie stands with it all. And I also do use internet as a coping mechanism because it's just so easy to
Mhm.
access these like bite-sized, almost like candy bits of like happiness that
Yeah.
you can kind of just feed on and hope, to nourish you, even though it really it won't ever. Um,
No.
and also it's like this book in itself is very centered around influencers, but outside the influencer sphere, I would even argue like some people say like internet-tainers that are not necessarily
Mm.
trying to sell you things, but are first and
Yeah.
foremost mostly there to entertain or to teach or to like show you something without like just directly being a salesperson. I think there's a lot of
Mhm.
value in those types of people. It's kind of influencer adjacent, but I
Mhm.
feel like much more positive for my mind. And
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Or like it yeah, it's not, I know what you're talking about, where it doesn't feel like they're trying to sell stuff, or like maybe occasionally they have like a code for something, but like mostly
Hmm.
they're just entertaining. Um the other cool part about this story is obviously the twin element. So they basically get separated as children when their parents die. And so we have one growing up like very wealthy and one growing up in not wealthiness and like kind of a toxic environment. So how like what all did you want to do with that twin element, because it kind of works in a lot of different ways in the book.
Yeah, I think a lot of the theming and core messaging in the book is this like aspect of like privilege and, wealth
Mhm.
and how that does contribute to social media and who becomes platformed and successful there. So
Mhm.
with the twin aspect, I was really interested in exploring how technically these two characters start off the same. like baseline, same family, same genetics, same look. Like they have so
Mm-hmm.
much that's the same, but then they get separated and one ends up very privileged and one doesn't have anything, which
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone can understand that like really changes a person, especially for a character
Yes.
like Julie. It's not just the fact that she doesn't have much, it's the fact that she has like an awful guardian that's like pretty abusive and toxic.
Yes.
It really does mess with someone's brain. And it's the question of like nature versus nurture. Like
Mm-hmm.
Julie herself doesn't find a lot of success, but like there's a question of, is it just because she was forced into this awful environment that didn't allow her to succeed, or was it like
Mm-hmm.
something else? Versus, you know, Chloe, it's like, is her success so much attributed to what she has and this privilege
Mm-hmm.
that she has and all the connections she has access to, or is it something else? Like, I think it's very interesting. And I did study psychology, and there are like notable twin studies. It's like very unethical because some of them purposely separated triplets and twins to study them. It's awful, awful
So
business.
rough.
Psychologists in
Oh,
the past were, the ethical
yeah.
standards are low. Um,
Yeah.
but you know, there is like very fascinating studies, and sometimes they end up quite similar and sometimes they are very different, you know, and
Yeah.
I'm just very interested in exploring that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of, when you were talking about that, it was also making me think too, just about how much like luck is a part of some things
Mm-hmm.
as well, which kind of like same thing in influencer or social media culture in general. Sometimes your video does really well and you have no clue why, and then sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's kind of all that like up in the air feeling a little bit. With the belladonnas, which is like this like elite group essentially of influencers, without giving too much away, um what kind of inspired you to like make that kind of cult like group of influencers?
Yeah. I mean, the cult, social media inherently has a very cultish feeling, especially, I
Hmm.
mean, just think about the languaging. It's like, oh, you're my follower, like I'm following
Yes.
you. And, you know, there's almost this idolatry perception of this person that you're subscribed to or that you love, and you feel a personal connection. And a lot
Hmm.
of you know, influencers call like their fans their family or their friends. There's like this very close kindred nature to them, and they kind of promote this parasocial vibe,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
for the sake of profit. So that
Yep.
in itself was a very natural sense that came out, but also in the way I personally, I felt like when I was a part of that community, there's a lot of like echo chamber talking. There's a lot of like encouraging each other, just saying things to
Mm-hmm.
like say things so you sound like you're agreeing, and like this
Yeah.
like extreme form of support that's like at once very beautiful because you're like cheering each other on, but is also very toxic. Um,
Hmm.
and you do see these like tribes of influencers sticking together, you know, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to say specific people, but you see it all the time with these
Right.
like friendships and influencers where they're always echoing each other or what they say, and there's so much of this like dynamic where they want to stick close to people that like understand them in a way. Um
Hmm.
and that kind of lends itself to that aspect, but also in terms of the cult stuff, I feel like a lot of people recognize now it's like a real thing. Like influencer cults are very, very real. There's like one
Yeah.
documentary about it on Netflix, but yeah, there's definitely, it's not just the one, you know. It's like I wrote this book before that
Right.
documentary came out. It's like there's mumblings, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
And
a
all
real
those like
thing.
content houses and stuff. Like it's
Yes.
wild.
The content houses. Also the fact that they're like all mostly children, it's like where are the
Mm,
parents, to be
yeah,
honest?
they don't feel like adults most of the time. Yeah.
Hmm.
It is. It's strange. And it does get so echo chambery, and then that's where like sometimes you can just so clearly tell that the friendship is like staged, or like they're meeting up for a very specific reason. It's not
Hmm.
like they just happen to like come across each other.
Yeah.
So it is fascinating. Like you see that a lot on YouTube stuff too.
Yeah.
um and that like raw positivity that's just like so surface level. I think that's like the kind of hidden toxic part of it, is like you think you're supported, but like it's so surface level. It's like, go get it, girl.
Yeah, literally. And then they
Yeah.
don't really stick it out when it really comes to it, you know. It's almost
Hmm.
transactional, a lot of these relationships, which in itself is kind of
Yeah.
like depressing if you were to be one of those people. But I guess some
Right.
of those people like thrive off those type of environments, you know.
That's true. That's
Hmm.
true. I do a little bit. Um, you mentioned that you have a degree in psychology. I was gonna ask about like and criminology. Did I see that as well?
Hmm.
So how did like those two together kind of like help in shaping this book?
Yeah, I feel like I've gotten this question a few times, and it's always interesting because I look back on it and I never like purposefully included my education when I
Mhm.
was writing. I feel like it wasn't a conscious thing, but I feel like
Yeah.
now that I look back, you know, in
Hmm.
hindsight, I'm like, okay, there's definitely some, you know, subconscious learning that's being shown on the page. Like
Yeah.
the topic of cults. I took a class on cults in my psychology class, and
Oh,
you know, it's
nice.
about the psychology of cults. Like, why do people choose to join cults? And a lot of the time, it's just like feeling of isolation and loneliness and community, which in itself, like a lot of that theming comes through in Julie Chan's like you know inner thoughts. So in that
Hmm.
way, I feel like I was influenced there, and also there's a lot of study on like conformity within populations and how we're
Mm.
willing to like shed parts of logic and ourselves to fit in with a larger crowd, especially if it's people that we admire. There's like a
Hmm.
very famous study called like the Ash conformity studies, I think, where it was like all
Mm.
university level students, male, and they were smart individuals, and they were given a really simple task of like a picture of like sticks, and like one stick would be like longer than the others, and you would have to answer like if is stick A longer than stick B, without like people influencing their opinion. People answered almost 100% correct, but as soon as I think the number was like six or more people told them the wrong answer, even if the answer was so obvious, the people would end up answering with the group. Like they'd actively,
Yeah.
I think I don't remember the famous quote, but it was something like, you know, like well educated people will like actively accept black as white in order to fit in with what other people are
Mm.
saying. So I feel like that
Hmm.
kind of theming also came through in the book subconsciously. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and you if you're kind of like having an inner conversation with yourself or whatever, you can catch it happening to yourself too, where you're like, oh, everyone is mad about this online. And then you're talking
Mm-hmm.
to someone and they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. But
Yeah.
like you saw it enough times that you're like, everyone is mad about
Mm-hmm.
this,
Mm-hmm.
or everyone
Absolutely.
is excited about this. Like it goes both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always so funny when I'm like talking to friends about something really online and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, Leanne. And I'm like,
I
that's embarrassing for me.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm like so much more, especially on TikTok, than my husband is. And so every now and then I say something and he's like, what? Like, what? Why did you just say that? Why are you singing that? Like,
Yeah.
just like all of that.
Hmm.
Um, and it also, I can't really, I'm trying not to go near spoilers, but kind of her arc near the end, like, makes a lot of sense psychologically too.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know if I can actually really say it without without spoiling things, so I'm just gonna cut myself off. Um, in that vein, it's like it gets difficult to distinguish what's reality on like multiple levels in the book. So she's taking over someone else's life, and then she's also having these kind of strange experiences with these influencers, and then social media itself makes it harder for us to like discern reality as well. So was that kind of intentional when you were writing it, or did it kind of just like play out that way?
It was intentional because, you know, we talked about a little bit more of like the superficiality of social media earlier. It's
Hmm.
definitely kind of like that, and how like you never know. Like we see a lot of these people, they like I don't want to say pretend to show so much of their lives to us because
Hmm.
sometimes they are being very honest. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, we only see a small snippet, and it's something that
Hmm.
they have not manufactured, but like purposely placed in front of us for us to consume for a
Mm,
reason. They're always considering an audience. And in that way, it's like you can never really tell what's honest and what isn't honest.
mm-hmm.
And in that way, like, without spoiling it, like you said, like she kind of goes
Yeah.
through that on like a meta scale. Like it's kind of
Yes.
social media. It's like what it feels like to be in social media, but off social media, like like
Yes.
in the real
Yeah,
world, you know? Um,
totally.
yeah, and she comes to some interesting realizations that,
Yes, she does.
yeah, so I don't know how much I can say, but yeah.
I know. There are like huge parts that like I'm realizing like really like 2/3 of it I really should not be talking about. I did so mom advice on Instagram, Amy. I
Um,
talked to her after she posted about interviewing you, and she said that you're also interested in other genres. So is there other genres you're wanting to write?
I mean, I started out writing completely the opposite. I started out writing, well, excluding my fifth grade novel that also happened to be like a
Yeah.
horror thriller for some reason. I guess it was like
Uh-huh.
always in the stars that I was going to write that.
It
But
must have been.
yeah, I wrote a lot of historical fiction, like very serious historical
Oh wow.
fiction, young adult historical fiction that like takes
Mm.
place in like the Ming Dynasty.
Oh
Um,
wow.
the voice is so different. Like it could not be any more different from Julie.
Right.
So in that way, sometimes I'm interested in dabbling back into that genre. Like I did have a
Mhm.
thriller, a historical fiction thriller, kind of in the vein of like Taylor Jenkins Reid. Um,
Mm.
but not Hollywood, like set in Hong Kong, like during the Hong Kong
Mhm.
cinema golden age, like the
Yeah.
Wong Kar Wai or like
Kind
Wong
of
Kar Wai.
multi-generational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and there's like a thriller story there that I was working on before Julie Chan that um didn't pan out because I tend to be a pantser and I was writing it, I
Oh
was
yeah.
vibing, and I got to the end and I was like, this is awful. Like nobody would want to read this twist. It would get like 1 star bombed. Like absolutely, I
Oh
would be upset if I
no.
was a reader. Um, but yeah, I would definitely like to return to it one day.
Mhm.
Um, and also maybe a little bit more dabbling in horror. Um,
Mhm.
I just love when things get weird, and I think horror is the
Right?
natural vehicle toward weirdness.
It
Yeah.
is. There's some fun horror elements in Julie
Yeah.
Chan, so I can only imagine what it'd be like um to read like your version of pure horror.
Mhm.
Is there something that draws you to kind of thriller and horror or writing those?
I think like in terms of horror, I think my brain, I don't know if it's like mental illness or what, but like I'm always drawn to like weird things. Like whenever I read a book,
Yeah.
like the weirder the better, to be honest. I like to feel
Mhm.
like discombobulated and confused in a positive way where I'm like
Yeah.
questioning life. And a lot of times you get
Yes.
that in horror. But in terms of thriller, I found writing thriller to be a lot more straightforward than writing other genres because it's so
Uh-huh.
plot based and
Mhm.
there's this like forward momentum that's so fun to write, especially
Yeah.
if I like, you know, I'm pantsing my way through it and I'm like discovering these revolutions as they come. I always
Mhm.
have like an image of how I want the story to end, but sometimes a journey to get there, the characters
Mhm.
take their own initiative. And I
Mhm.
think thriller is one of those things that kind of naturally lends itself to like twists and turns, and it's very, very fun
Yeah.
to write. Yeah.
Yeah. That's how I would feel about reading it, where I just feel like you're feeling like pulled to the end of it because you're like, what is gonna happen
Yeah, exactly.
to these people?
Yeah.
Uh the other thing, and it's like very clear on the cover too, is Julie's also like very different than all of the blonde haired, blue eyed, white influencers. And so there's also like that cultural difference for her as well. But what I even kind of noticed, like when you're introducing all of them, because you do meet a lot of influencers, whether they're like main characters or not, it was even hard for me to keep track of like which one was which, because they're all like that. So my brain's
Hmm.
like, how many blonde faces can I come up with?
Yeah.
But that it also reminded me of when I first started watching Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, and I was like, I don't. It took me like 3 episodes to be able to keep them straight. Uh, so what was it like, kind of like showing like those differences as well?
It's so interesting because before I had like even more belladonnas that I cut down. I kind of without saying too much, there's like some dinner table scenes, and like
Hmm.
it's a very famous The Last Supper type of. I
Mm.
wanted that imagery because that's kind of,
Yes.
there is like an aspect to it with like a main person, like, but without getting too much
Hmm.
into it, I had to cut some because like that's like too many. And right now I have
Yeah.
10 because it's like a nice round, nice number that I'm like
Yeah.
obsessed with. Um, but at the time, like one of my editors even asked, like, do we want to cut down on them? Because
Hmm.
it is like a real thing where you can't like focus entirely on all the 10 characters,
Hmm.
right? And I did pick and choose specific ones that get a bit more development, but it's something that Julie does like navigate herself internally. Like I admit, like she mentions that like, oh my god, there's so many of them. Like I don't know how to keep track. Like I don't know who these people are. Like and then sometimes she's
Yeah.
like, oh, I feel like they're all the same. But in that
Hmm.
way, it kind of also does lend itself to that kind of culty vibe where like eventually their faces start like morphing and it's like who is speaking
Hmm.
to me, like this person or this person, or is it all at once?
Yeah.
And they kind of become like a single entity ish
Hmm.
in some parts of the book without saying too much.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
I kind of like that feeling of like this like big number of people just like becoming one and like forming into
Hmm.
this singular feeling. I think that's like super fun.
Yeah.
um and also it's just like with influencers there's so many different niches that it's like I want to touch upon a little bit of each of them.
Yeah.
So that was also a vehicle that I could do that with.
That's what I was gonna ask about too, like how fun it was crafting their backstories, because some of their backstories are like, there's one in particular where I was like, that is just messed up. So like, I'm sure you had so much fun coming up with all their backstories then too.
Yeah, some of
Yeah,
them are, I don't want to say inspired by real people, but like
right.
some of them,
It is. It's
there's
there.
there's
It's
there's
it's
there's a
art
bit, yeah,
imitating life.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved it. I'm having to just shut my mouth though before I keep saying more spoilers about what I loved. Do you read while you're writing as well? And have you read anything recently that you've loved?
I always read while I'm writing. It's like at night I need
Mhm.
to read a little bit. I
Yeah,
feel like the day isn't over unless like I'm like dead tired and I literally my eyes are like this and
right.
I can't even, everything's blurry. I can't end the day without a
Totally.
little bit. I force myself to read like at least 10 minutes if I can't do more.
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of something I read recently, oh my gosh, I know my like one of my most recent. I mean, I finished the new Hunger Games
Oh
because
yeah.
yeah, I read that. Right now, I'm reading another 25 debut author.
Mm.
It's called Serial Killer Support Group by Saratoga
Ooh.
Schaefer. Yeah, it's about a girl whose sister gets killed by a serial killer, and then she infiltrates the support group to like find the killer. Um,
That's
I'm
cool.
about halfway, and it's very good so far. Um, and yeah, there's just so many great books out there these days. Like, especially now I'm getting to know other authors. I'm like, there's so much to read, so much greatness.
Yes. That's how I feel. My
Mhm.
NetGalley shelf just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, it gets a little daunting at times. I'm like,
It
oh my gosh.
does. It does. I'm like, I need to scroll TikTok and I need
Yeah,
to read today.
exactly.
Probably work at some point too. Um, well, obviously I loved it. There is more I would ask you, but I don't want to give spoilers. So maybe I'll say something off air. But where can people follow you to stay up to date with everything?
I'm on like basically every social. Actually, that's a lie. I'm not on like the new Twitter copies.
Oh
I'm not
yeah.
on those, but I'm
Blue
on like
Sky.
Instagram,
Yeah.
TikTok as the Liann Z or Z.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you can find me there. I also have a website where you can
Yeah.
pre-order or order the book wherever you have books available.
Hmm.
Get it from the library. I don't know. Yeah,
Yes.
Libby.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I will add those to the show notes so people can find that. And then thanks for talking with me about it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.
Yeah.